Today, it is very common to see a lot of people getting into various types of spiritual practices and all in a bid to gain some form of spiritual awareness, some form of spiritual connection. However, it is also very common to notice that a lot of these people, you and I inclusive, are practicing spiritual bypass. So what is spiritual bypass? Spiritual bypass is making use of spirituality in order to avoid unresolved wounds, unmet needs, and deep pains, psychological or emotional pains. What are some of the signs of spiritual bypass? Signs of spiritual bypass will include things like exaggerated emotional detachment, angrophobia or anger phobia, blind compassion, over positivity, debilitating thoughts about one's negative sides, and devaluing the physical aspect of oneself in preference to the spiritual things. Now, let's look at this one after the other. First of all, what is exaggerated detachment? Exaggerated detachment is like losing or being over detached and up to the point where one becomes emotionally numb. It's like you cannot have empathy for others and even for your own self. Blind compassion would involve being overly compassionate, even to the point of feeling hurt when you know that you're not supposed to say yes or supposed to act compassionately, but because you don't want to seem like a bad person, you act compassionately. That a good example would be someone standing at the side of the road and then meeting you there. You have something to do and the person tells you, can you watch my luggage for a minute? And you're like, no, I have to move out very soon. And the person insists. You feel like you don't want to do this, but because you don't want to seem like a bad person, you agree to it. So this is an example of blind compassion. And then anger phobia or angrophobia. You do everything you can in order to avoid situations of anger, in order to avoid getting angry, or in order to avoid people getting angry at you. So these are some of the symptoms of spiritual bypass. And even people who are overly positive, it's like, yeah, I cannot have, there's no negativity in my life, I reject all form of negativity, whatever. That is spiritual bypassing. That is a symptom of spiritual bypassing. And then when we think that because I have some negative feelings about something, for example, you get jealous. You get jealous about something and people tell you you're not supposed to feel jealous or you're not supposed to be jealous. It may be true, but the fact that you were jealous doesn't make you a bad person. So starting to feel like I'm an evil person or I'm a bad person, or starting to feel like I don't deserve to be loved because I have some of these negative aspects or negative emotions or feelings, I don't deserve to be loved. Criticizing yourself negatively is also a form of spiritual bypassing because you're trying to avoid the problem. You're trying to avoid those feelings. And instead of facing these feelings, you're trying to avoid them and push them to some spiritual level and say, oh, I'm a sinner, I'm a terrible person, in order to somehow feel good about yourself. However, what is the right thing to do in order to avoid spiritual bypassing? In order to avoid using religion and other spiritual practices as a way to lay a blanket over our deep-seated unresolved wounds? It is simple, but it's not easy. In one word, we have to face these problems. We have to face our psychological difficulties. The truth is that people, in a lot of cases, turn to spiritualism or turn to spiritual practices in order to feel better, in order to avoid certain things, or in order to feel better about themselves, about their growth. The idea is we want to become better and we want to feel better. However, when one turns to spirituality and decides to neglect the work, the mental and psychological work that they have to put in themselves in order to grow, then that is the problem. Then by doing that, one cannot even attain the spiritual growth one seeks. So by failing to do the psychological work, through escaping to spirituality, even spiritual growth is stunted. So the psychological work must be done. We must, as it were, face the demons within ourselves. The second thing we have to understand is that acceptance is very important. We have to accept ourselves. We have to accept our negative emotions. We have to understand that they are temporary. They are going to pass by. So when we accept these negative emotions, we accept that even though I feel this way, it doesn't make me a terrible person. It doesn't make me wrong just because I feel this way. Then it will be easier to navigate through these negative feelings or negative emotions and actually become better people. So acceptance is key. In fact, that should be the first thing we should do. Acceptance. Accept the negative emotions. What we decide to do after that is another matter. Is what could make us a bad or a good person. But we must at least accept these feelings we have. Be they good, be they bad. We must accept feeling uncomfortable about certain things. And we must learn to say no, learn to have boundaries. So firstly, accepting our negative feelings, not judging ourselves to think that because we have these negative feelings, we are terrible people. We should also know that we are imperfect. You as humans, we are imperfect. Imperfection is part of what is being human. So if we accept our negative emotions, accept the fact that we are imperfect and that there's some negative about us and there's some positive about us, and then we try to work on the psychological problems or difficulties we have, we will be able to achieve true growth, spiritual growth, and be able to become the best version of ourselves. Thank you very much and have a nice day.